Hi friends, I'm Zach Galifianakis and welcome to Between Two Ferns. What I want to talk to you about today is what I'm calling the novel of spiritual despair. What is a spiritual despair novel, I ask you? I just grabbed a bunch of random stuff off of my shelf to kick off the matter. Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner? No. Sam Shepard's 7 Plays, not even a novel, much less, but there are moments of the spiritual despair type genre experience in Sam Shepard. We're not going to talk about him. Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler, no. Sally Rooney, nothing Sally Rooney has ever written reeks of spiritual despair, but The Elementary Particles by Michel Houellebecq. Pretty much everything that guy writes reeks of spiritual despair. Oh, No Longer Human by the Japanese author Osamu Dazai. Well, the guy committed suicide after several suicide attempts, and so yeah, this book, No Longer Human, reeks of spiritual despair. Joan Didion, Play It As It Lays, absolutely the spiritual despair novel. There is a type of despair that is deeply, deeply spiritual and endemic, you could say, in the West, but not just the West, also the East. And it's a type of despair where a person is at the absolute rock bottom of their life. And this type of novel, every page, every instance, every word, every piece of punctuation radiates this kind of despair. I've always been attracted to this kind of novel, but I never could quite figure out why or what kind of category it fit in. But I had a breakthrough when I read this novel, which is the greatest spiritual despair novel I've ever come across. It's called Miss Lonelyhearts. Okay, peeps, are you ready? Miss Lonelyhearts starts in New York City, right? Like in the center of a busy, soulless industry. And that's oftentimes where these novels take place, like Bright Lights, Big City, or Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis, or Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. Like, these novels oftentimes take place in spiritual vacuums that are dense with meaningless, flashy, meretricious human activity and behavior, such as the type of activity and behavior that takes place at a newspaper. So like I said, this was written in the 1930s, and Miss Lonelyhearts refers to our protagonist, who is a dude in, I believe, his 20s, and he works as an advice columnist for a newspaper. He's Miss Lonelyhearts. We never learn his name. He's Miss Lonelyhearts. Okay, so it starts off where Miss Lonelyhearts is reading all of these letters at his desk that he gets from human beings who are in total and complete despair. They're sending letters to the newspaper, to Miss Lonelyhearts, to receive answers. And like, it starts off, you're kind of laughing because there's a cynical, ironic, satirical tone. The writing is so tight. This book is only 109 pages long, and every single word is a finely cut gem. Okay, so you're paying attention to every sentence. The author pulls your focus onto the page because there's a slight weirdness in the similes and the metaphors that he uses. So apparently Nathanael West was very inspired by surreal literature and like the Dadaist movement, and there's a hint of brightly colored insanity in his prose. Just a hint. The story is very linear, the world is very clear, and the characters are very human. Yet there is this slightly menacing, like very sharp nightmarishly funny, dreamlike flavor to the prose, and it just pulls you in because you're waiting for something crazy to happen. And that's why I say this is the prototypical and the most amazing spiritual despair novel that I've ever read, because every spiritual despair novel that I've read since this one tries to do the same sort of thing and does it to varying degrees of success. Of course, the very first greatest spiritual despair novel of the type I am talking about is Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Also a very small book about a very tortured male protagonist, like Miss Lonelyhearts. So you're sort of laughing in the beginning of this book, and you're like the wry, funny jokes, and you're very curious to see where this weird, tense, dreamy, crazy atmosphere is going to go, right? And then right out of the gates, the author drops one of these Miss Lonelyhearts letters into your lap, and it's absolutely heartbreaking, and the tone and the writing style completely changes. So, dear Miss Lonelyhearts, I am in such pain, I don't know what to do sometimes. I think I will kill myself. My kidneys hurt so much. So you've gone from this knowing, wry, sardonic, Miss Lonelyhearts newspaper writer perspective right into the heart of a deeply tortured person, a sincere person. And we hear her letter to Miss Lonelyhearts, and her name is Sick of It All. That's how she signs the letter. So she's right on the cusp of suicide. Then we get another letter. You know, Miss Lonelyhearts reads that letter, and he sits back and he grabs a cigarette, lights it, and he says, okay, I'll read another letter because I don't know how to answer that one. And he reads another one, and it says, Dear Miss Lonelyhearts, I am 16 years, and none of these people have very good grammar, diction, or they just let it rip in these letters to Miss Lonelyhearts. I am 16 years old now, and I don't know what to do, and I would appreciate it if you could tell me what to do. When I was a little girl, it was not so bad because I got used to the kids on the block making fun of me. And they spell things wrong, like M-A-K-E-I-N-G, fun of me. So this one, I'm gonna fucking cry right now. She says, so she's talking about her, she's talking about her life, and she says, I got so used to the kids on the block making fun of me, but now I would like to have boyfriends like the other girls and go out on Saturday nights, but no boy will take me because I was born without a nose. Although I am a good dancer and have a nice shape and my father buys me pretty clothes, I sit and look at myself all day and cry. I have a big hole in the middle of my face that scares people, even myself, so I can't blame the boys for not wanting to take me out. I dropped this book. That's like page 11. No, that's not even page 11. It's page 3. Page 2. I like dropped the book at that point. And like I thought, okay, this guy, this dude, this Nathanael West is hitting the ground running, because like this is like the ultimate he's juxtaposing this newspaper writer and this cynical, like Miss Lonelyhearts is this deeply, he's living in this deeply cynical world of newspaper writing. Like his peers, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, are the archetypal toxic, sexist, nihilistic, like white males, right? Like they are just the worst. And one of them is his boss, and his boss's name is Shrike, I think it is. Shrike. Yeah, Shrike. And Shrike is going to be this presence throughout the book. And Shrike is like Miss Lonelyhearts' boss and his editor. Shrike has a wife who's deeply unhappy that Miss Lonelyhearts kind of has a little bit of an affair with, but Miss Lonelyhearts, she won't let Miss Lonelyhearts touch her very much sexually. Shrike knows all about this affair, so he doesn't even really care. He just kind of knows that Miss Lonelyhearts takes his wife out and they kind of neck. But the wife won't let Miss Lonelyhearts do anything because she's sort of enslaved by her husband. Her husband is like this Mephistophelian, satanic, Luciferian character who's always whispering behind, in a Faustian manner, Miss Lonelyhearts' ear. And he takes Miss Lonelyhearts' impulses. He is like a Satan figure. He takes Miss Lonelyhearts' impulses for kindness and generosity and sincerity, and he gives voice to them, but he does it in this incredibly sarcastic, ironic voice, so that he's always shackling Miss Lonelyhearts' soul, really, and he can't find a way to help these people who are writing him letters, because Shrike always comes and starts making fun of him, or starts logically talking him out of religion as an answer to people's problems, or nice fresh country air and simple living out on the farm. He talks Miss Lonelyhearts out of that sort of Rousseauian ideal of the innocent man living out his natural impulses in an innocent environment. Talks him out of that. Talks him ultimately out of art being the answer. And of course, that's how this first chapter ends here. Shrike says, art is a way out. Art is one of life's richest offerings. But of course, in the end, art isn't the answer. And as we make our way through this novel, and we meet Miss Lonelyhearts' extremely unpleasant, sarcastic peers, they're all like Patrick Bateman's from American Psycho. They're sort of in that ilk. And they're rapey I don't necessarily recommend this book if you have... if you're sort of easily irritated by toxic white men, because this book was written in 1933, and although it is satirized and it is attacking that kind of personality, it is also steeped in the sorts of attitudes that we are very much questioning now in our contemporary environment. So don't read this if you're easily triggered. Okay, as we pursue Miss Lonelyhearts' attempt and quest to find some way to honestly answer these letters that are coming to him, we learn that he is like a priest. He is searching for Christ. And the weird thing about this book, Nathanael West was Jewish, but he had a Christ complex of some kind, or this Miss Lonelyhearts kind of has a Christ complex. And as the book progresses, Miss Lonelyhearts goes kind of insane. Like he's having a breakdown. And he's got a woman that he's having an affair with. She eventually takes him out to the country, and the prose gentles now. It calms down. The nervous system of the jangled and crazy Miss Lonelyhearts becomes placid and peaceful and flowing and gentle, like the stream that he and his girlfriend Betty are hanging out at. And they do simple things like they cook and they clip flowers and they clean up the cabin. And she's a virgin, and that whole sequence ends with them making love in a very, very sort of tragic yet tasteful, yet also a bit anachronistic climax, if you will, to this sequence. Now, there have been other things that have been going on too. Miss Lonelyhearts became extremely ill early on in the book because one of the Miss Lonelyhearts letters, comes to life, if you will. Remember I said this book is really sort of hinting at being surreal, but at the same time, it's totally, not. It's realistic fiction, if you will. But you feel like one of the Miss Lonelyhearts letters comes to life when a woman walks in a bar and she knows who Miss Lonelyhearts is. And she sort of seduces him. And he has an affair with her, and afterwards he gets extremely sick. And now he's mentally mind blown with this weird illness where the poison that has sickened him is all these letters which he just can't figure out how to answer. The advice columnist, we're told, is like the priest of the 20th century. And Miss Lonelyhearts cannot figure out a way to authentically address the concerns of his flock. And he's slowly and completely losing his marbles, right? But again, the story stays realistic if every syllable is vibrating with that feeling of total spiritual despair, right? And there's lots of gratuitous sex, there's lots of alcohol drinking, there's lots of drug taking, there's lots of partying, there's lots of glib conversation, there's lots of people with huge garish smiles and flashing teeth and cigarettes and drugs and snorting and fucking. All this shit is happening in this novel. It's like it's basically the contemporary version of Dante's Inferno. These people, the protagonists of these novels are going through their own inferno, their own dark night of the soul, their own woods. Although in the Inferno, the character is middle-aged. In the spiritual despair novel, it's usually someone who's like coming to the very end of their youth, right? So they still have that energy of a young person, but they're not kids anymore. That's usually, in my experience, those are the best spiritual despair novels. Like I said, I think this guy's like 25 years old, the protagonist here. So as this pithy little masterpiece charges towards its conclusion, its superheated conclusion and climax, a series of plot points sharpen, ripen, and come to fruition. One of which is, guess what? Betty, his girlfriend, whom he just deflowered, is pregnant. Okay. This coincides with the fact that the earlier woman that Mr. Lonelyhearts had sex with, that I told you about her, it seemed like she had literally crawled out of one of the Miss Lonelyhearts letters, and he had an affair with her, and he'd become extremely sick after that affair. And actually, Betty had helped pull him out of that sickness. So after Miss Lonelyhearts and Betty come back from their deflowering journey into the countryside, we find out that the woman that Miss Lonelyhearts had an affair with has a husband. The husband is an interesting character. He eventually approaches Miss Lonelyhearts and reads him his own Miss Lonelyhearts letter. And then Miss Lonelyhearts goes to have dinner with this woman that he had sex with and that woman's husband. And there's a whole big messy exchange wherein Miss Lonelyhearts at this point, he's straight up like a Dostoyevskian hero. Like he's somewhere in between a prophet and a sage and a spiritual warrior and a total madman. And I gotta tell you, when I was a monk, I came across people like this all the time. They come at you and they blather these turbocharged monologues about some kensho or awakening they had in 1985 or something. And it goes on for 40 minutes. And their eyes, their pupils are the size of freaking 8 balls, pool 8 balls. Right? You can see the very back of their super red throats. You can see their tongues drying out as they're giving you these monologues. And you can't figure out if they're crazy or if they're onto something. And one of the things I like about this book is there is the accusation of contemporary, you could call it postmodern, post-capitalism, neoliberalism, our world, the culture that we create, the things that we value, money, fame, status, these forces preclude genuine spiritual teachings and experiences and breakthroughs. That's kind of the accusation that a book like this makes, and that a lot of the spiritual despair novels make. And that, again, that's one of the reasons that I like them. I'm going to get into this one a little bit, because when I found the monastery, I was in a similar state. I was in a state of kind of spiritual despair, similar to the kinds that the characters in these novels are, and I was headed for self-destruction. Now, how this book ends is Miss Lonelyhearts does self-destruct. The author kind of, I didn't like the super duper very last ending, which I'm about to blow for you here in terms of spoilers. So skip ahead 20 seconds or something if you don't want a spoiler. So basically what happens is, skip ahead if you don't want a spoiler. Miss Lonelyhearts meets up with the gentleman whose wife he had sex with, right? And the guy, they fumble together a little bit, and the guy pulls out a gun, and the gun goes off, and Miss Lonelyhearts dies. So it's a bit of a deus ex machina, only it's not the hand of God giving us an answer for the story. It's more like the hand of the devil, the hand of evil fate, right? This guy sort of accidentally shoots and kills Miss Lonelyhearts. So Miss Lonelyhearts never transcends his spiritual despair. He's ultimately a victim of it. Maybe you could say he's even a martyr, although I'm not so sure I would go that far. The book kind of ends with a question mark. It's an absolute masterpiece in this genre of spiritual despair. So before I discovered Zen, I was living like my own novel of spiritual despair. I was working these temporary jobs in Hollywood, and I went from one terrible, horrible, abusive, like clipboard throwing, crazy producer boss to another. And it was also a time when I'd begun to experiment a little bit with substances. So I snorted cocaine for the first time, and I had ecstasy for the first time, and I had mushrooms for the first time, and I smoked weed even for a little bit more consistently than I ever had before. And I wasn't going down the path of addiction. That wasn't my thing. But I was experimenting, and each one of these experiments was extremely destabilizing and was usually accompanied by some Cray-Cray type experience. For example, the first time I did ecstasy, I was with my friend Alvaro and his boyfriend JC. And Alvaro was like my best friend from college, and he had come out to me later on after having convinced me for 4 years of college that he was a very good heterosexual Catholic of Opus Dei, which is a very conservative heterosexual Catholic organization. Suddenly he says, I'm gay. And we became really good friends after that, because this weird hyper-conservative mask dropped away, and I got to see his human side. And he got this boyfriend, JC. We went to a gay dance club one night and took ecstasy. And Alvaro was right here, JC was right here, and then JC started massaging me and touching me, and I wasn't into that. And also I found JC to be a little bit manipulative. He was always trying to skis on people, including me. And I was like, Alvaro, what's up with your boyfriend, dude? So I fled JC and Alvaro, and we had taken ecstasy, and I remember this moment of having this experience okay, I know this is chemical induced, but if this absolute euphoria and literal ecstasy that I am feeling right now is humanly possible, then the universe that we live in is not fundamentally bad. This is one of the reasons I did experiment with drugs, because I could have experiences like that. It was really one of my more profound chemically induced experiences. I'll never forget it. It was really this feeling of, prior to that experience, I had thought it might be that we live in a fundamentally evil or bad universe. After this experience, I thought, nope, not if that sort of experience of ecstasy is possible. Even if it's chemically induced, this cannot be a fundamentally evil or bad universe, because it was such a good feeling. Now, at this event, this gay dance club, I met a girl, which I found oftentimes happened. I hated the breeder bars on Hollywood Boulevard with the stinky cologne-smelling beefcake guys, and the girls with the short skirts and the shiny pantyhose and the shiny lips and the shiny teeth and the enormous cosmetically enhanced situations. I did not survive in that heterosexual, death match, all right? Like, I was always the first person eliminated from that competition. But whenever I went to the gay clubs, you'd hang out, you have some fun, and then sooner or later you start meeting some girls, friends of the gay guys. Like, it was a much better situation for me. And I met this one woman, and she was originally from Nigeria, and then her parents moved to Canada, and I'll disguise her identity a little bit because I found that people don't really like to be talked about or written about. That's one thing I've learned making these videos and writing my books like Single White Monk and Zen Confidential. So I'll say that she was a dancer. I mean, this is sort of close to the reality. She was a Canadian African dancer, and she was part of a famous dance troupe. And she had a lot of really good energy, and we clicked that night. And we started hanging out together, and we clicked, and the sexual intercourse was fairly spectacular, as I recall. And she was doing a lot of drugs. Like I said, she's a dancer, and she was in this very competitive troupe, and she had to always be at the top of her game. And so she would be out giving performances, and then she would like come to my apartment coked to the gills at like 4 in the morning. Well, one time she tried to break into my room, and my slightly racist neighbor saw her trying to break in and called the cops, and then ultimately scared my neighbor away. Doorbell rings, I open it up, like 15 West Hollywood policemen storm into my apartment. Oh boy, what is going on here? Needless to say, my life being the spiritual despair novel that it was at the time, this whole situation came to a head with what I call the phantom pregnancy. She became convinced that she was pregnant, and she called me up, and just, we got into this horrible dynamic. See, this is how these things go. You're young, and you're testing boundaries, and you're cleansing the doors of perception, if you will, with substances. And you're experiencing these most amazing moments of ecstasy, like I did when I took ecstasy for the first time. But then you have these lows, and you crash hard, right? So she was attacking me and yelling at me, screaming at me, oh my God, I'm pregnant, and we have to get together, and what's your problem? How could you do this to me? And going on and on. And eventually, it turns out, there was no baby. She had kind of like made it up, right? This took the bloom off the rose of our relationship for me. And eventually I just had to cut everything off. But the last time I saw her, we had a lot of drinks, and it was not a wonderful evening, right? But the point is, I woke up with an extreme hangover the next morning, and I had to go to one of these horrible Hollywood jobs, and I'm driving along like Western Avenue, and I'm getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And I pull over, and I run into this Korean church. I don't know why I ran into the Korean church, now that I think about it. But I ran into this Korean church. It was a Catholic Christian church, but it was Korean. I must have been in Koreatown in Los Angeles. And I was like running to a bathroom, and I didn't make it, and I vomited all over the staircase, right? So it's like 8 in the morning on like a Tuesday. I'm going to my temp job. I'm recovering from this pregnancy scare by this woman who's been destabilized by too much drugs and too much dancing, right? And I'm sitting there, like, vomit all over the place, and I'm thinking, this is not gonna end well. And I saw the fact that I was self-destructing. And I am not a self-destructive person, despite what I may have presented to you here. I'm actually pretty careful. I'm actually pretty conservative on many, many ways. And I thought, this is not your path. You are not like Jim Morrison. Like, whatever you would like to, romantic notions you would like to have about yourself because of all these spiritual despair novels you've read, that's not your path. You're not the kind of guy that's gonna do a bunch of drugs and self-destruct, the great artist who poofs out in a flame of glory. It's better to burn out than fade away. That's not your path. But you're so stupid that you might just like self-destruct, because you can't figure out anything better to do. And that was the moment there was a shift, and I left the world of the spiritual despair novel. I just lifted right out of it. I read the final page of my own spiritual despair novel, and I said, no, that's not how this is going to work. Like, this is going to be a bigger novel. Part 2, spiritual rehabilitation novel. So methinks spiritual despair is in many ways a very tempting and romantic option. You know, outside my apartment building, for some reason Johnny Depp wasn't canceled in Europe, and there's a picture of him in a cologne ad, and it's like he's got his long hair and his scruffy face, and he's like sort of like lacquered with sexy sweat, and he's like looking like a man who has been on many sexual and chemical adventures, right? And he's like the rock and roll star who's seen it all, done them all, right? And as an alternative to the daily grind, to bourgeois family life, to being a company man, our culture, binary and dualistic as it is, offers us the self-destructive option, the romantic option, the rock and roll option, the spiritual despair option, and it glamorizes it. And when you're young especially, it can seem kind of cool and interesting to self-destruct in that way. And what I like about the spiritual despair novel, something like Play It As It Lays, although I must admit I hated this novel, more like Miss Lonelyhearts, the classic spiritual despair novel. What I like is that it takes ennui and angst, and it characterizes these problems as I experienced them. I didn't have a mental illness, and I was able to pay my bills, and I didn't have bombs falling on my head. I wasn't suffering from a fatal disease like cancer. Leonard Cohen told me once, most people who are in your position or my position, people in affluent countries who are getting along, most of us suffer these problems of the heart or matters of the heart. Another word for the spiritual despair. I went to my first full-on Zen Buddhist Dai-sesshin retreat kind of when I was exiting my spiritual despair moment. And part of the reason I passed through it was because of this retreat. I remember how difficult this retreat was. I'd never really sat before. And I was perched on a cushion for, 18 hours a day, more or less, in an extremely strict environment. And I just had to sit there with my thoughts, with my brain. And of course, what I noticed is what we all notice at these retreats is these volcanic eruptions of thoughts and feelings, memories, emotions arise. And this is the kind of stuff that the spiritual despair novel is made out of, right? Drama, baby. That's what I began to realize, is that the romantic crash and burn rebel persona is actually puerile. Excuse me. Immature, uninteresting. That's what I ultimately began to realize, sitting on that cushion. I began to realize how interesting the mind itself was, how it produces its own reality. I began to realize that I didn't have to listen to every scream that my mind produced. I did not have to heed every call that it made, and I did not have to accept every conclusion that it came to, right? I could just sit there and let this, well, I had to just sit there and watch my mind happen. And it was very painful. A lot of you experience pain and suffering on the meditation cushion. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I'm with you. It can be very painful sometimes, but eventually that energy exhausts itself. And I experienced this around day 5 of that retreat, I think. I had a moment where I had gone through every experience possible on the meditation cushion. I had tried everything to find peace, to find enlightenment, to find Kensho, Satori, to equanimity, and I had exhausted every emotion, all my memories, all my storylines about who I am and how I was raised and what my goals and ambitions are and what the meaning of life is and blah, blah, blah. After a while, my mind just got exhausted with all of this. And it kind of fell for a moment. And I could just hear these loud squirrels that we have up at the Mount Baldy Zen Center. They hang out in these trees and they make noises. I could just hear the squirrels. So I just sat and listened to their chatter for a while. So exhausted was I of my own mental chatter. Because you can't do anything else when you're meditating. You just sit there. You detox from the poison of ego. And I realized what was happening there later on. I was connecting. Connection is the antidote for spiritual despair. And if nothing else, I found it was more interesting. So I never looked back on that former path of self-destruction, of substances and crazy romances and the belief that my artistic ambitions can fulfill me, Hollywood, all of that got left behind for this very simple answer that Zen practice through Zazen meditation on the cushion showed me. Connection. When the beast of ego drops for a little bit from inside your skin, and there's no more barrier between you and your surroundings, right? There's this connection. In that case, the squirrels came in. And Zen practice went on to show me different ways of manifesting connection. When you're in the kitchen making rice, you're paying attention to what you're doing. Instead of going crazy, telling yourself stories, hoping for the next cigarette or cup of coffee, or which one of the students you have a crush on, or are you answering the koan, or are you wasting your life at a Zen center? Should you have gone to grad school? Blah, blah, blah. You pay attention to the rice. You make relationship with the rice. Zen practice is always about making relationship. There's a line in the Rinzai Roku, the book of Rinzai, or Lin Chi, who's the founder of my lineage in Zen, the Rinzai lineage. There's a line in there which I won't be able to remember where he says something like, when you're connecting truly, then even if you're in the burning house of hell, it's like a pleasure garden. So there's a spiritual despair novel, and then there's my experience as a Zen Buddhist practitioner and a monk. And I'm grateful that I was able to not live out my own version of spiritual despair, because I was really close, and I didn't have so many models for how to escape my vicious circle of despair. I mean, I just had like the Catholicism that I grew up with and had to drop because it wasn't authentic. And then I had everything society is telling me is good and true. And society is totally fucking full of shit. Like, that's what the pure truth of the spiritual despair novel is. Whether it's Notes from the Underground by Dostoyevsky, or The Idiot by Dostoyevsky, or The Devils by Dostoyevsky, or Crime and Punishment by Dostoyevsky. As you can see, he's the master of the spiritual despair novel. Or Miss Lonelyhearts, or much of Philip Roth's oeuvre. Like, the message that the great spiritual despair novels tell us is that there's something rotten in Denmark, that the values that our society is presenting to us are fake and poisonous, right? But the work of a novel is not to answer these questions or to provide a way out, not necessarily. I think some great novels do. I think Anna Karenina has moments in the end where options are offered. I think Brothers Karamazov offers options, Dante's Inferno offers options, but generally speaking, novels raise questions, and the great spiritual despair novel raise the question of how to escape spiritual despair. But more than anything, they paint a picture of it. But when you close the novel, put it aside, and sit down on your cushion, you can manifest in your own way, as best as you can, your answer to the problem of spiritual despair, which can be connection, giving yourself to that out-breath, connecting with the exhale, and then bringing the outside world into you, connecting with the outside world through the inhale. My mentor used to tell me that when you exhale, the outside world inhales, and when you inhale, the outside world is exhaling. This is kind of an ineffable love, or like I said, true love is what my teacher called it, or making relationships. So I think through Zen practice and through meditation practice, or at least I have gotten hints at, and sometimes a little bit more than hints, have experiences around the exodus or release from the land of spiritual despair. If you would like to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/ShozanJackHobner. That is increasingly how I'm making my living these days, and I've gotten a lot of new patrons recently, and I wish I would have thought to bring your names out to thank you here. One of them is Jeffrey, who lives out here in Vienna. Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you to all my new patrons, and thank you to all my existing patrons. You know, it's a beautiful community that I'm extremely grateful for. So thank you. And if you want, you can hit subscribe, hit like, hit notifications, leave a comment, etc., and so forth. Otherwise, thank you, friends, and I'll see you next time.